My name is John Snape. I'm an Associate Professor at Warwick Law School, the University of Warwick, and I've been here for nearly 20 years now, since 2005. I was originally a practitioner of law until 1993 when I became an academic, and I practiced in the area of corporate commercial law as a qualified solicitor. I'm still a qualified solicitor, but I don't practice law. I don't hold a practicing certificate. And the experience of legal practice that I gained then, I think has stood me in very good stead for being aware of what it is that practitioners do. So I was born in Lancashire. I went to school in Blackburn and read law at Oxford, and after qualifying as a solicitor, went into practice as a solicitor, as I say, in corporate commercial work. So my interest in the subject has certainly developed. I suppose on my first becoming an academic, a lot of what I wrote was very technical, as you might expect, from my background as a practitioner. And as I've gone on, as I'll explain, my work has become far more philosophical, far more theoretical, but it's retained that strong root in technical law. And I hope to talk a little bit about that as we go along. So the overwhelming reason is the fact that I think it's a question, you know the old saying, it's horses for courses. Wherever your skills are, that's the place to be. And I have always felt a far greater interest in the theory and philosophy and indeed the history of law than I have in its practice. And I think practitioners have very distinct skills. I think one of the things that has happened in legal academia over the time I've been an academic is a certain pulling apart of the practicing profession and the academic side. And that suits me very well. I think they're very different skills. When you become an academic, you're motivated by the idea that there are some big questions to be dealt with that transcend individual cases, things that you want to write about, things that you want to think about in detail. And also, and this is very important, maybe not stated enough, knowledge that you want to pass on, insights that you've had, in my case, in part from practice, but also much more importantly over time in relation to my reading and reflection on the subject. So I would say, yeah, a mixture of a wish to know as much as I can about what's actually going on in my subject, what are the ideas, what's the history behind it, but also very importantly a sense of, and this in a way sounds quite arrogant, but a way, how can I put it? It provides a way of putting across what you think, what I think about what law amounts to, and that's very important to me. Right, so my general area of interest is tax law, but I think of tax law as being a particular category, possibly the most important category of public law, the law of the individual and the state. Tax law hasn't always been seen by that, and many people, or seen like that, but many people who think of tax and public law would think of the subject differently from the way in which I do. But I was inspired very early on by the writings of somebody I greatly admire, Professor Martin Laughlin at the LSE, whose theory of public law was very important in shaping my theory of tax law. So the short answer to your question is I'm a tax lawyer, but not in the way that you might think. I'm a contextual and philosophical tax lawyer within the context of public law, and through public law, politics and political philosophy. My current project, my main current project, is something that I've been working on for a very long time. I was going to say, I hope not too long, but I suppose I've reached a stage where I want to say something, not in a definitive statement of my view, but something which says as completely as I can what it is that I think my subject amounts to. And this is a book on the taxation of multinational groups, and it's through the lens of a particular view of public law. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that my public law scholarship in tax is based on this Lochlinian approach, which is at its centre has a concept of what in the 18th century and before was known as political right. So the right there stands for the right as opposed to wrong, and the right is coterminous with law. So public law and tax law as a species of public law is a form of political law. It's the law of the state. Now that's not to say that that it's therefore corrupt, that it's the law of bad behaviour. What it is to say though is it's the law to do with governing, as public law generally is on this view. And because it's to do with governing, it's very closely related to politics, which strictly speaking is, on an important definition, quotes the art and science of politics. And so the book I'm working on is an attempt to take that theory, which I've developed and really worked at in the context notably of a monograph I wrote quite a long time ago, which was based on my PhD, which is called The Political Economy of Corporation Tax, and which is largely interpretative. So it's about the way in which the theory I've just mentioned explains the kind of decisions on tax policy and tax legislation that governments take. And at the time I wrote it, there was an enormous amount of information available on this, because it was the time of Gordon Brown's occupancy of the office of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and a lot of material was made available. What I've wanted to do in the current book is to build that theory out, so to take it beyond the stage of interpretation and to say, well, what can be done with it? How do we look at this political right in terms of a higher order of ways, not just in which the law is shaped, but how it should be shaped, not in general, but in particular situations. So this is not a blueprint theory. It's not a theory about, redesigning the world on a big scale, or even redesigning a system. It's about the kind of considerations that should weigh in the minds of legislators, civil servants, judges who are adjudicating on tax law cases. And to that extent, it goes beyond the interpretation of the material. So to transcend the original plan in that way, I've drawn in some unusual theory, which if I may, I won't talk about just yet because the book hasn't yet appeared. Some unusual theory which is seems to encase this interpretative theory very nicely, but also seems to take the interpretation, as it were, to the next level, to what it is that we might do, how we might do things better than the way in which they've been done in the past. And to do that in the context of what has got to be the biggest tax policy question of our time, and that's the question of how to make the individual tax law systems of the many different states of the world cooperate and coordinate effectively to tax the cross-border profits of multinational groups. So I seek to do that, in short, on a footing of philosophical ethics, encasing this legal analysis. My teaching philosophy has always been very torn between two things, and I tend to move between these two planes. The first and most important thing is I have always found it of the greatest satisfaction to take a complex area of law and, without simplifying it in the sense of making it simplistic, to explain the rules and principles that it contains, the rules and the exceptions, in such a way as to show the point of them, what it is that this is doing, this law's doing. And when I do that and I talk to a student about some incredibly abstract area of law, and I'm able to illustrate it with examples. My teaching is very full of examples, but I base it in examples and I show where the weight of the issues falls, and I see on the face of the student to whom I'm speaking a kind of light. I still find that enormously satisfying. The other thing, though, is that I also like to sow doubt in the mind of the students I teach. So on the second level, I would say I suppose this is the thing to which, this is the other part of the thing to which I'm torn. My former colleague Jayan Nayar was very, I seem to remember, was very unabashed about this. He said his task was to problematize his subject for his students. And I was very struck by this, because since I heard that, I agree with that. I think on one level, you need a kind of exposition which enables the student to get a grip on the issue, what it is that the law is seeking to do. But you also need to ask the questions which will form the basis of the critique. And at Warwick, that's very important, because we as we'll come on to talk, I think, this is very much a law school rooted in the tradition of law in context, whatever that may be, or how individual academics define it. But its constant demand is to require students to question relentlessly what it is that they're presented with, and to do so very often in terms of the just. Is this just? Is it right that it should be like this? And so, at the same time as explaining it or making the technicality clear, I love to get students asking that question. In a sense, if you were teaching, if I was really true to this, I would just simply ask questions. I would do the kind of Socratic thing, and I would just, throw out questions on all of the topics, because it's by doing that. But the problem with that is that somebody has to understand. They have to basically understand technically what a particular area of law is doing in order to be able to evaluate it. And so there are limits to that. But certainly the questioning of the rightness of the value of something is very, very close to my heart. So that's been a rather extended answer, but that's my philosophy. It's continually to play on this tension between clarity of exposition and critical thought, critical analysis. In a nutshell, for me, law in context is about seeing the idea of law in the broader perspective of political philosophy, of a questioning moral philosophy of the whole. So my view of this has changed as the nature of my work has changed, as I've moved from writing in an interpretative way about my subject, in which case I would say the context was very much the way in which politics is done, the way in which ideas have found their way into political practice, and to look instead at the moral framework for the rules that we create, to work out what the questions should be that we need to ask in order to effect significant change, in order to retain, I suppose, for want of a better expression, a sense of the ideal in what we do. This is not an original observation, but to have a sense not just of things as they are in law, in the broader context of the social sciences or of the humanities, but of how things would be if we wished them. If somebody said to us, what's the best for what you would wish for, rather than what it's realistic for you to achieve. So yes, I think that's the way I would put it. It's not an original formulation, and this will tie in with the theory that I use in the book. For me, law in context is that. It's the idea that when we think about law, we should think about law in the broadest possible context, about what's the best for which we could hope, rather than what it's realistic for us to achieve. Because I think that's what an academic can contribute to the study of the subject.